"I'm sorry, ma'am." The four-star general stood at attention, bowing his head before the shackled woman in the interrogation room, leaving the entire SEAL unit frozen in disbelief. No one could comprehend what they were seeing, the highest-ranking general in the military apologizing to a female Marine sniper accused of treason. The cuffs still dug into her wrists, a streak of dried blood marking her cheek. Just moments earlier, they had mocked her as the deserter who left her team to die. But only the general knew she was the operative he had personally embedded in a covert mission, and this entire trial was a trap to expose the traitor within. She lifted her head, a cold smile touching her lips. "Now, do you believe, sir," she said quietly, "who's really been serving the country?" The base was humming with calculated urgency, a stage being set for a public execution designed to be messy and definitive. Every hour before the interrogation had been meticulously orchestrated by the very enemy they sought to expose. The charges were not merely logistical errors or failures of command. They were politically tailored accusations crafted to discredit the entire existence of Operation Mirror, an initiative Frost and his associates in the military-industrial complex desperately wanted dismantled. The financial stakes involved in covering up the failed assassination attempt on the NATO general, an attempt Olivia had successfully thwarted on the ground, making her a liability, were astronomical, far outweighing the career of one staff sergeant. This trial was less about justice and more about sending a chilling, indisputable message up the chain of command. Loyalty to Cross means death, and the Helix shadow runs deep and wide. The hangar typically used for storing mission cargo had been selected precisely for its echo, and its lack of privacy ensuring the humiliation was amplified. The humiliation was the point. The overhead lights in the hangar were buzzing like angry hornets. Olivia Ward stood in the middle of the concrete floor, wrists zip-tied behind her back, boots still caked in Afghan dust. Her hair was pulled into a plain knot. No makeup, just a faint scar that ran through her left eyebrow. She looked small against the circle of SEALs who towered over her. Commander Blake Soren stepped forward. First, the kind of guy who wore his trident like a crown and sneered at anyone who didn't. He circled her slow boots, echoing. "So, this is the ghost sniper," he said, loud enough for every phone camera to catch it. "Funny?" I pictured someone taller, a younger SEAL call sign Raptor, spat on the floor near her boots. "Heard you left your spotter to bleed out. Real hero move." The circle laughed, the sound bouncing off metal walls. Olivia didn't flinch. She just stared straight ahead, eyes the color of winter steel. The laughter died down, replaced by a tense silence where the only sound was the slight movement of Blake's polished boots on the concrete. He paused directly behind her, close enough that she would have to crane her neck to meet his eyes, making the disrespect physical and layered. Instead of speaking, he casually reached out and pulled the single zip tie, holding her wrists together, just a fraction tighter, the plastic ratchet mechanism clicking once sharp and loud in the massive space. It wasn't enough to break her skin, but it was a calculated petty exhibition of control, a silent promise of the deeper pain to come, carried out in front of his audience. The move confirmed that the mockery had moved past theatrical posturing and into a personal venomous attack aimed at shattering her composure. She responded only by shifting her weight imperceptibly, anchoring her feet more firmly, refusing to acknowledge the physical intrusion. Blake stopped in front of her, close enough she could smell his spearmint gum. He flicked the collar of her faded camis. "Thrift store chic. Cute. Did Goodwill sponsor your last deployment?" Another laugh, louder this time. Someone in the back started a slow clap that died fast when Olivia finally spoke. "You done measuring?" she asked, voice low, steady, like she was asking the time. The clapping stopped. Blake's smirk twitched. Captain Mira Donovan stood off to the side, arms folded tight across her clipboard. She'd read Olivia's file 100 times, 93 confirmed kills, 0 missed shots, medals locked in a drawer somewhere. Mira's stomach turned watching this circus. But orders were orders. She stepped forward, voice clipped. "Ward, you're charged with dereliction, desertion, and aiding Helix. Anything to say?" Olivia turned her head slow, met Mira's eyes. "Only that your intel's bleeding from the wrong wound, Captain." Mira tightened her grip on the clipboard, the metal edge digging into her palm. Her role here was not just to read the charges, but to project complete institutional certainty. Yet a knot of doubt was forming in her chest, fed by the glacial calm in Olivia's gaze. She glanced involuntarily toward the shadowed observation balcony high above the hangar floor, where a civilian oversight committee, or perhaps just one highly influential political figure, was rumored to be watching the proceedings in real time. That unseen presence felt heavier than the SEAL's collective scrutiny. Mira knew the charges were airtight, but she also knew the man whose signature was on the execution orders, a man who had just bypassed the usual military legal channels in a way that screamed desperation, not procedure. This forced public shaming felt like a distraction from a deeper, colder truth. And Mira felt the ethical foundation of her career cracking under the pressure. A ripple went through the SEALs. Blake rolled his eyes. Listen to her, still playing sniper. He nodded to two of his men. They shoved Olivia to her knees. The concrete bit through her pants. Raptor yanked her head back by the knot of hair. Smile for the body cam princess. Let the Corps see what failure looks like. Olivia's breath fogged in the cold air. She looked up at the circle of faces, each one sure they were right. She said, soft enough only Blake heard, "Careful. Pride bruises easy." He answered with a backhand that snapped her head sideways. Blood dotted the floor. The room went still for half a heartbeat. Then the jeering started again louder, covering the sound of her heartbeat in her ears. As the SEALs started to roughly haul her back to her feet, a man in a crisp dark suit, not military but a high-level attaché from the Defense Intelligence Agency, stepped briefly into the hangar doorway. His face, trained for stoicism, was momentarily stripped bare. He saw the crimson smear on Olivia's cheek and the raw, unblinking defiance in her eyes, and a flash of profound uncertainty crossed his features, a question mark of doubt about the entire proceeding that was almost immediately suppressed. He had authorized the transfer of classified funds and believed the charges were real, but the visceral sight of the violence against a decorated officer, particularly one who hadn't even offered a defense, seemed to momentarily shake the foundation of his confidence in Major Frost's narrative. The DIA man quickly retreated his presence, a tiny, almost invisible tear in the fabric of the lie. But his fleeting expression was caught by Captain Donovan, who was watching everything, filing away the silent evidence. They marched her down the corridor to the holding cell boots dragging chains. Every door slammed like a verdict. Inside the cell, the overhead bulb flickered. She sat on the metal bench, wrists raw, and waited. She always waited. That was the job. The initial white-hot rush of adrenaline began to recede, leaving behind the cold, heavy throbbing of her abused shoulder and the dull, grinding pain of the steel cuffs. Olivia didn't rub her wrists or shift for comfort. Instead, she used the agony as a focusing mechanism. She methodically ran through the physical conditioning protocols she'd learned years ago, isolating the pain in her mind, mentally compartmentalizing the bruised flesh from the clear space needed for thinking. Her breathing slowed to a deep, deliberate rhythm, a metronome against the ticking clock of the operation. She focused on the metallic smell of the air, the uneven pattern of the cinder blocks, refusing to let the indignity of the beating or the certainty of her confinement penetrate the wall of professional discipline she had built around her mission. Physical compromise was a failure. Emotional compromise was annihilation. Hours later, the door opened again. Major Kellen Frost walked in, polished boots, perfect salute. He set a legal pad on the table. "Last chance, Ward. Give us the Helix contact, and maybe you walk out with 10 years instead of a rope." Olivia picked up the pen they'd left, cheap plastic Marine Corps logo, half rubbed off. She drew one continuous line, no pauses, no lifts. When she slid the pad back, Frost's face drained of color. It was a hand-drawn map of an enemy bunker no satellite had ever photographed. Every hallway, every guard post, every tripwire. Frost's voice cracked. "Where did you?" "Still on the job, Major," she said. "Question is, are you?" Frost snatched the pad, stormed out. The door locked. The Major didn't move fast enough, stumbling slightly on the third step outside the cell door. He pressed his back against the cool cinder block of the corridor wall, the confiscated map crumpled tightly in his fist. His carefully constructed composure momentarily abandoned. The sweat on his brow was not from physical exertion, but the sudden paralyzing realization that Olivia had just supplied irrefutable proof of her deep-level penetration into the Helix network, a network he believed he controlled. The map was not a confession. It was a deadly silent accusation that confirmed she wasn't just bait, but a highly effective operational agent who could destroy his entire criminal enterprise from behind bars. His hand shaking slightly reached into his coat pocket for a burner phone, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He quickly punched in a secure line, his voice a low, frantic hiss into the receiver. "She knows. She gave me the location of the fallback lair. It has to happen now this second. No more tribunal, no more waiting. She's compromised the whole chain." The map designed by Olivia to be entirely accurate yet useless, without the extraction codes only General Cross held, had served its purpose, pushing the traitor to abandon all caution. Olivia leaned her head against the cinder block wall and closed her eyes. Somewhere far off, a memory surfaced her father's voice on the porch of their Virginia farm. "People will measure you by the dirt on your boots, Livy. Let 'em. Dirt washes off. Character don't." Next morning, they dragged her to the mock tribunal, folding chairs of projector reporters from 3 military blogs. Frost stood at the podium like a ringmaster. "Evidence links Ward to the NATO general's assassination," he announced. Grainy footage played a muzzle flash coordinates that matched her last known position. The room hissed. Blake leaned back, arms crossed, grinning. Mira stood beside the screen knuckles, white on her pointer. She clicked to the next slide bank transaction's fake routing numbers. She couldn't meet Olivia's eyes. What the footage so compellingly presented conspicuously failed to show was the time-stamped satellite imagery that had been scrubbed from the official record just hours before the tribunal began. This imagery would have clearly placed Olivia 200 meters off the coordinates at the time of the fatal shot, in a secondary overwatch position, where she was in fact tracking the actual Helix assassin, who was wearing a stolen uniform patterned exactly like her own. The true evidence, a short burst of thermal signatures showing the quick, decisive, non-lethal suppression of 2 Helix lookouts before the main shot was fired, was the key to her innocence. But it was buried deep in a classified folder that only Frost, using his unauthorized access codes, had managed to delete. The room was shown the muzzle flash, but never the tactical life-saving moves she made immediately before, it twisting the narrative from counter-terrorism into a simple, cold-blooded act of murder. A lieutenant in the front row muttered, "Hang her." The word rippled outward. Olivia sat straight in the defendant chair, wrists cuffed to the table. She stared at the camera in the corner, red light blinking. The room's collective anger seemed to ignite the flashbulbs of the handful of embedded journalists who had been granted exclusive access to this military spectacle. They captured the moment of Olivia's silent condemnation with cruel efficiency, the harsh, unflattering light emphasizing the dried blood on her temple, the metal cuffs, and the sheer overwhelming weight of the institution against her single small form. This was a show trial designed to be photographed, tweeted, and broadcasted, securing Frost's reputation as a hardliner, while simultaneously burying the secret mission forever beneath a mountain of public, irrefutable shame. The bloggers furiously typed their captions, "Treason has a face, the ghost sniper caught." The performative nature of their revulsion, driven by the sensational image of a decorated female soldier's downfall, was the final layer of betrayal, the public's easy willingness to trade dignity for drama. She mouthed 2 words, "No one caught. Watch me." Olivia's court-appointed defense counsel, a silver-haired major named Davies, who was secretly a key part of Frost's operational structure, completed his silent sabotage. When his turn came to cross-examine, Mira Davies simply cleared his throat, smoothed the lapels of his uniform, and offered a weak 1-sentence statement. "No questions, Your Honor. The defense rests on the mercy of the court." The deliberate passivity, the refusal to challenge the manufactured evidence, and the immediate surrender of her legal rights was a final crushing act of professional betrayal, cementing the impression of her guilt for everyone watching. Olivia didn't turn to look at him. Her jaw merely tightened, acknowledging the maneuver as the final piece of the trap snapping shut. A silent confirmation that the only person left fighting in that room was herself. That night, the base went dark. Every screen, black except the one in Olivia's cell. A video file autoplayed Frost in a hotel room, handing a flash drive to a man with Helix ink on his neck. The timestamp was 3 days old. Olivia watched Frost watch himself on the screen. His hand hovered over the kill switch, then dropped. He knew the feed was looping to every command terminal on base. Mira burst into the server room, boots skidding. She traced the upload signature Black Viper, Olivia's old call sign from a mission that never officially happened. The call sign Black Viper wasn't just a label. It was the name of a specific non-regulation tattoo Olivia had placed on the inside of her left wrist, a tiny, almost invisible coiling snake that only General Cross and one other person knew existed, a mark of the deep cover off the book's world she inhabited. As Mira stared at the signature on the screen, her eyes widened and she instinctively looked down at her own forearm, checking for a mark that wasn't there. She realized that the code was the key, not just a name, and that whoever had uploaded the counter-evidence was either Olivia herself, operating remotely, or someone with access to her deepest, most guarded operational secrets. The tiny detail instantly elevated the situation from a mere court-martial to a high-level counterintelligence war, confirming that the charges were a cover story, and that the sniper was the only clean asset in the entire dirty transaction. Mira's breath caught. She whispered to the empty room, "You beautiful bastard." Dawn painted the parade deck red. They'd set up the firing squad, early 12 rifles, one blank tradition. The execution site was a theatrical masterpiece of institutional cruelty, a simple wooden stake driven into the packed earth, surrounded by a low wall of sandbags meant to catch the shrapnel, a gruesome piece of practical design. A chaplain stood slightly apart, murmuring a rote prayer into his vestments, his presence lending a false sense of final dignity to the rushed proceedings. The 12 riflemen of the firing squad stood at ease, their expressions shielded by the shadow of their helmets, their weapons resting against their shoulders, the collective weight of their silence more terrifying than a shout. It was the institutional machinery, the precision, the cold adherence to protocol that amplified the lie, the sheer crushing authority of the military establishment preparing to murder its most loyal asset in front of its co-conspirator. Olivia walked out in leg irons chin high. Frost stood on the platform, microphone hot. "Let this be a lesson," he boomed. "Treason dies here." Blake stood at parade rest, jaw tight. He hadn't slept. Mira stood behind the line of shooters, hand on her sidearm, eyes locked on Olivia. Frost raised his arm. Olivia looked straight at him and said loud enough for the front row, "You still think the target's me?" Frost's arm wavered. The side door exploded open. General Aiden Cross strode through 4 stars, catching the sunrise. Secret Service fanned out. Silence dropped like a curtain. Cross carried a leather briefcase older than most of the SEALs. He climbed the platform, set the case down. The files spilled, signed orders, satellite logs, voice intercepts. He didn't raise his voice. "Stand down," he said. Every rifle lowered at once. The instant General Cross gave the order to stand down, the dynamic of the Secret Service detail surrounding him shifted with terrifying professional speed. The 2 agents closest to Frost and the firing squad didn't verbally respond. They simply and instantly positioned themselves with their bodies facing outward away from the general, their hands moving to rest just above their holstered weapons, creating a silent, impenetrable human barrier that signaled a complete transfer of authority. Their eyes scanned the rooftops, and the gathered troops effectively communicating that their allegiance was solely to the man with the 4 stars, and the evidence not the frantic major on the platform. This silent, instantaneous change of guard underscored the general's overwhelming political and military gravity, confirming that the stakes had just escalated from a court-martial to a full-scale institutional power struggle. Cross faced the squad. "The woman you cuffed is Staff Sergeant Olivia Ward, recipient of the Navy, Cross personally recruited by me for Operation Mirror. Her mission was to become the bait that caught the shark." He turned to Frost. "And you took it hook, line, and sinker." Frost's face crumpled. He lunged for the sidearm of the nearest guard. Olivia moved, first chain snapped by a Secret Service knife mid-stride. Olivia's reaction was a flash of pure instinctual training, executed with non-lethal precision, despite the blood loss and exhaustion. As the Secret Service agent sliced her chains with a specialized cutting tool, she didn't waste a millisecond celebrating her freedom. Instead, she launched herself not at Frost, but sideways, tackling Mira Donovan with a low driving force that took the captain out of the line of fire. The move was a perfect demonstration of her core loyalty mission: first protector, always. Simultaneously, Cross's accompanying strike team, anticipating the exact moment of Frost's desperate act, moved with overwhelming coordination, neutralizing the 3 guards Frost had secretly recruited for his final escape in less than 3 seconds. The entire scene was a breathtaking choreography of counterintelligence, the smooth, coordinated silence of the rescue unit, contrasting violently with Frost's panicked single act of rebellion. She tackled Mira clear as Frost fired wild. The bullet grazed Olivia's shoulder, red blooming through tan fabric. She rolled, came up with Frost's wrist-locked pistol, clattering. Frost screamed, "It's a setup!" Cross answered by nodding to the big screen behind him. The hotel video played on loop volume max. Every phone in the crowd lit up. 2 weeks later, the parade deck looked different. Full-dress blues flags snapping in the wind. Olivia stood front and center shoulder, bandaged under her uniform. Cross pinned a new metal silver star with a tiny V for valor. He stepped back, saluted. She returned it, crisp. Blake approached after the ceremony hat in hand. "Sergeant," he said, voice rough. "I was wrong." Olivia studied him a beat. "We all wear blinders sometimes, Commander. Take yours off." She walked away, boots ringing on pavement. Blake stood rooted to the pavement for a full minute after she left, the brim of his hat still held respectfully over his heart, watching the distance grow between him and the woman he had publicly humiliated. The apology felt pathetic, thin, and utterly inadequate in the face of the courage she had displayed. He was a man whose entire career had been built on a foundation of certainty and physical dominance, and now that foundation felt like shifting sand. He replayed the entire hangar scene in his mind, the zip tie tightening the spearmint gum, the casual backhand, seeing each moment not as an act of command, but as the ugly self-serving behavior of a deeply blind institutional pawn. He slowly replaced his hat, pulling it low. The weight of his trident suddenly feeling less like a symbol of honor and more like a shackle forged of his own arrogant misjudgment, signaling a long, painful reckoning with himself that had just begun. Mira caught her at the edge of the field. She held out a small wooden box. Inside lay a spent casing from the shot that grazed Olivia's shoulder. "Something to remember us," by Mira said, eyes shining. Olivia closed the box. "I remember everything," she answered. "That's the job." Frost vanished into a transport plane before the sun set. Rumor said, Leavenworth rumor said worse. The blogs that live-streamed the tribunal posted retractions, then apologies, then silence. Sponsors pulled ads. Careers ended between commercial breaks. Olivia boarded a Black Hawk with no tail numbers. Mira sat across, headset on. Cross's voice crackled through. "New orders, ladies. Helix has a sister cell. You're the ghost again." Olivia looked out the open door as the base shrank below. She touched the scar on her eyebrow, smiled at nothing. The chopper banked east. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and let the rotor wash drown every voice that ever called her small. "You've been quiet a long time, haven't you? Carrying weight nobody saw, feeling the sting of words you never answered. Olivia's story isn't fantasy. It's a mirror. Look close. That strength you buried still there. That dignity you protected still yours. You were never the problem. The room was. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.